This episode was produced using AI-generated voices and scripting. Okay, so what if the most valuable corporate partnership in AI is actually a pair of handcuffs? Because that's basically what an internal OpenAI memo is now saying out loud.
And nobody's saying this. The memo isn't some disgruntled employee thing. This is OpenAI's own internal assessment that Microsoft structurally limited their ability to sell to enterprise customers. Like, the deal that everyone points to as proof OpenAI is a juggernaut, it's the thing holding them back.
Okay, but hang on. Let's be specific. What does structurally limited actually mean here? Because that phrase can mean a lot of things.
Right, so the core of it is that Microsoft has exclusive rights to resell OpenAI's technology through Azure. That's the cloud platform. So if a Fortune 500 company wants to use GPT-4 or whatever the latest model is in their enterprise stack, the default path runs through Microsoft. OpenAI can sell ChatGPT subscriptions directly, sure, but the big enterprise API deals, the ones that actually build a massive recurring revenue base, so the core of it, that Gatekeeper.
Which means OpenAI is trying to IPO eventually, and their revenue story has this giant asterisk on it.
That's the whole problem. You want to go public, you need to show you control your own commercial destiny. And right now, a huge chunk of how OpenAI's technology reaches the market is mediated by a partner who has their own competing incentives.
Their own competing AI products, Copilot, the whole Microsoft AI stack.
Exactly. Microsoft isn't just a distribution partner. They're a competitor building on top of the same technology. So when OpenAI says Microsoft limited their commercial expansion, part of what they're saying is Microsoft had every reason to channel demand toward its own products and services rather than letting OpenAI build direct enterprise relationships.
So here's my question. Everyone knew the deal structure when it was signed. OpenAI needed Microsoft's money. What was it? $13 billion in investment? You don't take $13 billion and then act surprised that there are strings attached.
No, actually, it's the opposite of what happened. When the deal was originally structured, OpenAI was a nonprofit research lab with no commercial ambitions at all. The partnership made total sense in that world. Microsoft gets cutting edge AI for Azure, OpenAI gets compute and funding. Nobody was thinking about IPO readiness in 2019.
And then ChatGPT happened.
And then ChatGPT happened, and suddenly OpenAI is potentially one of the most valuable companies on the planet. And they're locked into a deal that was designed for a completely different version of themselves.
That's the part nobody talks about. The deal was rational when it was signed, and it's irrational now, and both of those things are true.
Right. And investors are treating the Microsoft relationship like it's this crown jewel. Oh, they've got Microsoft backing. That de-risks everything. But the memo is saying the opposite. It's a constraint. It's limiting how fast OpenAI can grow its own top line.
Okay, but here's where I push back. Microsoft is also OpenAI's biggest customer. They're paying billions. You don't bite the hand that literally funds your compute.
And that's the trap. That's exactly the trap. You're dependent on them for compute, for distribution, and for a massive chunk of revenue. So how do you renegotiate from a position of strength when you need them for all three things simultaneously?
Who does that actually help? Like, if I'm an OpenAI investor right now, what am I supposed to do with this memo?
Well, it depends on whether you think OpenAI can actually restructure the relationship. And there's some evidence they're trying. The whole conversion from a cap profit structure to a full for profit, that's part of disentangling from this web. But the commercial exclusivity piece with Azure is the hard part.
Let's talk about the Microsoft side though, because there's a whole separate thing happening. Microsoft slowed their AI spending, and now they're scrambling to catch up. That context matters here.
It matters a lot. So Microsoft actually pulled back on data center spending. They had made these enormous capex commitments. We're talking about a plan for over $80 billion in fiscal 2025 on data centers. Then they got cautious. They slowed or paused some builds. And now demand for AI compute is surging past what they can supply.
Wait, seriously? 80 billion and they still don't have enough capacity?
The actual number that's wild is that Azure revenue growth has been constrained by capacity, not demand. They have customers lined up who want to spend money, and Microsoft literally can't serve them fast enough. So now they've reversed course. They're restarting paused data center projects. They've recommitted to this massive build out, but there's a lag. You can't flip a switch on a data center.
Which means during the exact period when AI adoption is exploding, Microsoft's capacity constraints are also constraining OpenAI's ability to serve customers through Azure.
Now you see why the memo reads the way it does. It's not just that the deal structure limits OpenAI's commercial freedom. It's that even within the deal structure, Microsoft couldn't fully deliver on the compute and capacity side.
That's the whole game right there. OpenAI's locked into a distribution partner that's also capacity constrained
And competing with them.
and competing with them. Great.
Look, Microsoft had good reasons to slow spin. They were looking at returns on AI infrastructure and getting nervous about whether demand would materialize fast enough to justify the investment. That's normal corporate risk management. But the consequence for OpenAI is real.
Okay, so here's a contrarian take. Maybe this memo leaking is actually strategic. Maybe OpenAI wants this out there because it builds the narrative for renegotiating the Microsoft deal.
I think that's almost certainly part of it. You don't write an internal memo like this without knowing it's going to find its way to reporters. This is leverage building. You're telling the market, hey, we could be growing faster if we weren't constrained by this partnership. That's a message aimed at Microsoft's negotiating team as much as anyone.
So the memo is a weapon.
The memo is a weapon, and it's a signal to future IPO investors. We know about this problem. We're working to fix it. Here's the upside when we do.
I mean, is there a world where Microsoft just says, fine, we'll loosen the exclusivity? What's in it for them?
That's the key question. Microsoft's equity stake in OpenAI is enormous. If OpenAI goes public at a massive valuation, Microsoft benefits directly. But they also benefit from keeping OpenAI's technology locked into Azure because that drives their own cloud revenue. Those two incentives are in direct tension.
Okay, but hang on. You said earlier the original deal made sense for the version of OpenAI that existed at the time. Doesn't that mean Microsoft also got a deal that was way below market value for what OpenAI turned into?
Oh, Microsoft got the deal of the century. $13 billion for what might be the most important technology company of the next decade, and exclusive commercial distribution rights. That's absurdly good for Microsoft, which is exactly why they're not going to give it up easily.
So we're in a hostage situation where both sides have the gun.
Both sides have leverage and both sides have exposure. Microsoft can't afford to lose OpenAI. It's the foundation of their entire AI strategy. Copilot, Azure AI services, all of it. But OpenAI can't afford to blow up the relationship because they need the compute, they need the cash, and they need the enterprise distribution while they build their own.
Which is why Sam Altman keeps making nice in public while apparently authorizing memos that say the partnership is.
A structural limitation on commercial expansion. Yeah,
There's another angle I want to hit. Microsoft restarting these paused data center projects. They specifically brought back builds that they had shelved. That's not just spending more money. That's an admission they got the timing wrong.
and nobody's saying this. The fact that Microsoft misjudged AI demand timing is a much bigger story than people realize. This is the company that bet earlier and harder on AI than any other big tech firm. They're supposed to be the smart money here, and even they pulled back too soon.
What does that tell us about everyone else's AI infrastructure bets?
It tells us that demand is real and it's accelerating faster than even the best positioned players expected. The Azure capacity constraints aren't hypothetical. They're showing up in Microsoft's own earnings commentary. Revenue growth that's being capped by supply, not demand. That's an extraordinary thing for a company that's spending tens of billions on build out.
So, circling back to OpenAI, if Microsoft is now scrambling to add capacity, doesn't that actually help OpenAI in the short term? More Azure capacity means more API throughput means more revenue.
In the short term, sure, but that's the problem with being dependent. Your growth is a function of someone else's capital allocation decisions. OpenAI didn't choose to slow down. Microsoft chose for them by pulling back on data center builds. And now Microsoft choosing to speed back up. OpenAI is a passenger.
A passenger valued at, what's the latest? North of 150 billion?
Something like that. Which makes the memo even more pointed. You're one of the most valuable private companies in history, and your commercial growth rate is being determined by your partner/competitor's infrastructure budget. That's a governance problem. That's an IPO problem.
Okay, here's my other contrarian take. What if Microsoft is actually right to have this much control? OpenAI burns cash at an unbelievable rate. They need supervision. They need an adult in the.
Come on. Microsoft isn't supervising OpenAI. Microsoft is extracting value from OpenAI. Those are different things. The deal isn't structured for OpenAI's benefit, it's structured for Microsoft's. the compute provision, the exclusive distribution, all of that primarily serves Microsoft's strategy of making Azure the default platform for AI.
But OpenAI agreed to it.
OpenAI agreed to it when they had no leverage and no commercial product. The world changed. The deal didn't. That's the whole story.
Fair. But there's a version of this where OpenAI without Microsoft is just a really expensive research lab that runs out of money.
In 2019, absolutely. In 2025, OpenAI has ChatGPT. They have 100 million plus users. They have direct consumer revenue. They have enterprise customers begging to sign deals. The dependency ratio has shifted. They're still dependent on Microsoft for compute, yes. But the idea that they'd collapse without the partnership that's not what's happening. That was true 3 years ago. It's not true now.
So the memo is basically OpenAI saying, we've outgrown this relationship.
That's the subtext. The text is Microsoft limited our commercial expansion. The subtext is we need to be free.
Okay, let me play this forward. What does an OpenAI IPO look like if they can't resolve the Microsoft distribution issue?
Ugly. I mean, not ugly in terms of valuation. They'd still get a massive number because the market is desperate for AI exposure. But the S1 would have a risk factors section that basically says our largest commercial partner is also our largest competitor and controls significant portions of our distribution. That's the kind of thing that puts a ceiling on the multiple.
Versus if they disentangle.
Versus if they disentangle, you get a clean story. Fastest growing tech company ever, direct enterprise relationships, own your own distribution. That's a very different pitch to public market investors.
You said something earlier about the for-profit conversion being part of this. How does that connect?
The cap profit structure that OpenAI originally had literally limited how much investors could earn. It was designed for a world where OpenAI was a research nonprofit with a commercial arm. Converting to a full for-profit entity removes that cap, which is necessary for an IPO. But it also, and this is the part people miss, it potentially reopens the commercial terms with Microsoft because the entity itself is changing.
Wait, so the restructuring is also a legal lever to renegotiate?
It could be. The entity that signed the original deal no longer exists in the same form. There's at least an argument that the terms need to be revisited. I'm not saying that's a slam dunk legally, but it's a card to play.
That's clever. Like, genuinely clever if that's what they're doing.
Sam Altman didn't get to where he is by being straightforward about his intentions. I'll just say that.
Okay, zoom out for a second. There's a bigger pattern here that I keep seeing. Everyone in AI right now is locked into these partnerships that were signed during the land grab, and now the terms don't match reality. Amazon and Anthropic, Google investing in everything. It's not just OpenAI and Microsoft.
Right? But OpenAI and Microsoft is the most extreme case because the dependency goes deepest. Anthropic has Amazon, sure, but they also sell through Google Cloud. They have direct API access. They have more commercial flexibility. OpenAI's Azure exclusivity is uniquely restricted.
So OpenAI got the worst deal of the bunch, is what you're saying.
They got the biggest check with the tightest strings, and it was the right trade at the time. And it's the wrong trade now.
That's going to be the story of AI corporate deals for the next 5 years. Right trade then, wrong trade now.
And the question is whether the companies that need to renegotiate can do it without blowing up the relationships they depend on. That's the tightrope. And this memo was OpenAI's first public wobble on that tightrope.
Not public, internal memo that happened to leak.
Right. Happened to leak. Sure.
Okay, last thing. Microsoft scrambling on data center capacity, does that actually give OpenAI more leverage in the renegotiation? Because if Microsoft is already struggling to meet demand,
It cuts both ways. Microsoft's capacity constraints mean OpenAI can say, you're not even delivering on your end of the deal. But Microsoft can also say, we're investing 80 plus billion in infrastructure, largely because of you. So don't tell us we're not committed. Both are true. Both are levered.
mutually assured frustration.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect way to put it. Mutually assured frustration. Neither side can walk away, neither side is happy, and both sides are leaking to the press about how the other one is the problem.
I think the thing that makes this genuinely important, not just tech drama, is that we're talking about the infrastructure for what everyone keeps calling the most transformative technology since the internet. And the commercial structure of how it reaches the world is being determined by a deal that was signed when none of this existed.
That's exactly it. And the resolution of this, whether OpenAI gets free, whether Microsoft maintains control, whether they find some middle ground, that shapes how AI gets deployed across every industry. It's not just about two companies. It's about whether the most capable AI models get distributed through one cloud platform or through an open market.
Which, honestly,
Yeah, stakes are high and the people making the decisions are optimizing for quarterly earnings and IPO timelines. Welcome to the future.
the future brought to you by a deal that was signed in a completely different era. Cool. Cool, cool, cool.
At least the memo's out there now. Whatever happens next, the market can't pretend the Microsoft partnership is pure upside anymore. The constraint is on the record.
On the record via a leak of an internal memo. We love transparency.
We love strategically timed transparency. There is a difference.
That there is.